Hi, PES. This is Mrs. Crowley. Today I'll be reading Chapter 9 of The Cricket in Times Square with you, titled Supper with Mr. Fong. And I have our cricket friend Chester here reading with us. And he makes a really cool sound. There you go. Enjoy. Mario decided that there must be something wrong with Chester's diet if he was eating $2 bills. He had been feeding him all the things he liked himself, but now it occurred to him that what was good for a boy might not be right for a cricket. So he made up his mind to take the matter to an expert. Late one afternoon, when he got off duty at the newsstand, Mario cleaned up the cricket cage, gave Chester a dusting off with a Kleenex, and took him to Chinatown to see Mr. Fong. It was almost 7 o'clock when he got there, and the shop was closed. He peered through the window and could make out a crack of light under the door to the inner room, and he heard the murmur of two voices talking together in Cantus. Mario rapped on the shop door. The light coming from the inner room flickered. He rapped again, louder. The inside door opened, and Mr. Fong came into the shop, squinting through the half-light. When he saw Mario, his eyes widened, and he wiped his hands on his apron. Mr. Fong opened the door. Smells of garlic and onions drifted through the inner room, making his stomach gurgle. "Cricket boy," said Mr. Fong. "Hello, Mr. Fong." Mario hated to disturb the man during what was clearly his dinner time, but Mario's work at the newsstand had made it hard to visit him earlier. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a problem with my cricket." "Very well, come in." Mr. Fong led Mario into the next room, which held a small living area with a kitchen. Another man stood by the sink, drying dishes with a dishcloth. He had more white hair than Mr. Fong and was dressed in a crisp shirt topped with a sweater vest. His expression was serious, like Mario had caught him in the middle of a deep thought. On a cast iron stove, a deep, round-bottomed pan simmered with something that made Mario's mouth begin to water. Plates of steaming food crowded a round table, green leafy vegetables and flat mushrooms in a brown sauce, a plate with a steamed fish with slivers of zesty ginger and a lidded soup tureen. The table had been set with 2 porcelain bowls painted with peonies, 2 porcelain spoons to match the bowls, and 2 pairs of chopsticks. "This is my older brother," said Mr. Fong, gesturing at the second man. "He is Mr. Fong, too, but his students call him Professor." Mario thought that being a teacher explained the man's stern face, and he felt himself stand up straighter. "Hello, Professor." "And this is Mario, the boy I was telling you about," said Mr. Fong, nodding his head towards Mario. "Aha!" The professor snapped out his dish towel and folded it into a square. "You are the boy that has my lucky cricket cage." Chester could feel Mario grip his cage extra tight. Suddenly, the professor's face came closer until Chester could see the man's bright eyes studying him, as if he was asking Chester a question. Chester felt he should say something, so he played a series of chirps. Ready? The professor's face broke into a smile. "Ha! That's not a blackhead, General Brother. This cricket is a poet." Chester liked the sound of the word poet. Mario grinned, and that made Chester even happier, so he chirped again. Ready? "So what seems to be the problem with your cricket?" asked Mr. Fong. "The problem is," Mario began, "my cricket eats money." And he told him all about the $2 bill. "I think I'm not feeding him the right diet." Mr. Fong nodded, and Mario was glad to be taken seriously. "What you need is a mulberry tree," said the professor. Mario was relieved. There were many mulberry trees around New York. Chester would be fed well. Chester was happy, too, because mulberry leaves were his favorite. Mario's stomach chose that moment to let out a growl. Mr. Fong looked at his brother, and the professor shrugged. "You know what else cricket's like?" asked Mr. Fong with a smile. "No, what?" said Mario. "Chinese food. Would you like to join us for dinner?" The professor clicked his tongue. Mario's mother might be expecting him. "She's not," said Mario a little too quickly. He had eaten chop suey before, but nothing as splendid as this. Mama knew he was in Chinatown and would save him a plate, but he could eat that for lunch tomorrow. Mr. Fong removed a folding chair from a broom closet and handed it to Mario, indicating that Mario should place it between the other 2 chairs. Setting the cricket cage on the table, Mario unfolded his chair, while Mr. Fong brought him another bowl, spoon, chopsticks, and even a saucer for Chester. Using a special clamp, The professor lifted a ceramic dish from the round-bottomed pan and added it to the ones already on the table. "Be careful," said the professor. "This dish has been stimming in the wok." Mr. Fong rubbed his hands together. "Black bean spare ribs, my favorite." Mario could hardly wait to try black bean spare ribs, but the professor lifted the lid off the turn. "Soup first." With a ladle, the man spooned a clear soup with watercress in each bowl. Chester got a bite of the watercress on his saucer as well. Egg drop soup for health," said the professor. The broth had just the right amount of salt and was streaked with egg, and Mario drank every drop. Chester ate his watercress in satisfying snips. The professor used a wooden paddle to spoon rice into each of their empty bowls. "Do you know how to use chopsticks?" he asked Mario. "No." Mr. Fong showed Mario how to work the two long sticks to pick up the food, though the chopsticks kept slipping out of Mario's fingers. It was much easier to bring the bowl to his mouth and scoop in the food, which the men were doing as well. Mario bit into a chunk of the spare ribs. The meat was tender and juicy and full of garlicky flavors. The steamed fish melted into his mouth. "Try the bok choy and the black mushrooms," said the professor, placing a thick and glossy black morsel into his mouth. Though Mario did not usually like mushrooms, these were too interesting to pass up, especially with the professor making contented sounds as he chewed. The mushroom tasted savory and rich, especially with the mouthful of rice. Chester got a helping of each dish as well. He had never tasted anything so good. In particular, he liked the bok choy because vegetables were his favorite. He was in the leafy green heaven. Every so often, he would have to stop eating and chirp for joy. "Let's chirp for joy." The professor nodded at the cricket. "My blackhead general had a good chirp too, but his talent was his strong jaws." Mr. Fong watched the professor help himself to another serving of spare ribs. "Just as your talent is strong jaws." Mario laughed, and the professor raised an eyebrow at him. "What is your talent, Mario?" Mario stopped chewing and tried to think of what his talent was. He was good at adding and subtracting, and he also had a good sense of direction. What were those talents? Mr. Fong could see the wheels spinning in Mario's head. Sometimes a grain takes time to shed its husk. That means talents don't always show themselves until later. When the four of them had eaten as much of the food as they wanted, Mr. Fong sliced wedges of oranges for dessert. And I lost my place. Chester was so full he wondered if he would be able to hop again. After Mario had sucked the last bit of sweet juice from the rind, Mr. Fong announced, "Time for some roux." Mario wondered if this was another dish, but Mr. Fong ducked back into the shop, and when he returned, he was carrying one of the instruments Mario had sent in the windows, the one that had resembled a ship's mast. "Chinese violin," Mr. Fong explained, setting the instrument on his lap. It had a long handle with two strings. Using a bow that was connected to the handle, Mr. Fong began to play a beautiful melody that neither Mario nor Chester had ever heard before. It made Mario feel like he was visiting another country, and he wished his parents could be here to visit it too. He was reminded of Mr. Smedley's story about the great musician Orpheus, whose harp playing made the whole world stop to listen. Between the feast and Mr. Fong's stirring melody, Chester was feeling so contented that he began to chirp. The music reminded him of his running brook back in Connecticut, and he felt just a tiny bit homesick. The professor leaned back in his chair and folded his hands atop his belly. Closing his eyes, his face relaxed into a smile. Mario wished he could keep this moment in his head forever. He had been troubled when he came here, but now he felt so peaceful he might sing as well. Thanks for listening.